Historians often distrust theory, despite the central role it plays in understanding the past. Our accounts do not spring fully formed from the sources. They are filtered and shaped by theories. By this I don't mean a hypothesis, such as Akbar was attempting to promote religious tolerance. I mean a set of assumptions about how the world works, why things are done, an overarching idea which determines the questions we ask and how we answer them. Classic examples would be Marxism, which encourages us to seek explanations in economics and class conflict, or the subaltern school, who redirect our attention to the agency of previously marginalised groups. Today's theoretical debate cuts through numismatics, that is, the subfield of history which specialises in interpreting physical manifestations of money. In a recent lecture on the channel, Shailendra Bandari referred to the disagreement between propagandists and functionalists, and today we will dig into what precisely that difference is and how it shapes the interpretation of numismatic evidence. At the core, propagandists and functionalists disagree about why coins are valuable, and because this is a much more pronounced debate for pre-modern history, it is mostly coins we are talking about. For the propagandist, the value of a coin is intrinsic. It is made of precious metal, and that metal is worth something. This is not to suggest propagandists are naive. The value of coins is complex, and to work as money they need to be worth more than the metal they are made of. But propagandists believe that the value is strongly linked to the metal. In contrast, functionalists believe that the value of a coin derives largely from external factors. They see coins as basically tokens, which are desirable because of their acceptability in exchange. And while the metal content of pre-modern coins helps, the main component in their value is the political and religious authority which backs them. As a result, these theories emphasise very different roles for designs on coins. For the functionalists, the design of a coin serves to make it work as money. It needs to look like already existing coins to tap into cultural norms about value. It needs to deploy symbols of religious and political authority to reassure the user. It needs powerful backing because money involves a leap of faith that this object you cannot eat, shelter under, or burn for warmth can be exchanged for those things in the future. On the other hand, propagandists see the image as essentially arbitrary. The coin is already valuable. A blank disc would work just as well. Instead, images appear because of the ubiquity of coinage. It is used throughout society, and propagandists argue that in that it is the closest parallel to modern technologies like newspapers, radio, or television. So the images are on coins to send a message from the ruler to the users, and this idea of a message is what is meant when people refer to propaganda. That is an important caveat. In numismatics, the word suggests nothing about the honesty of the message. Of course, not everything a numismatist says about a coin is based on design, but a lot is. And in general, when a propagandist looks at a coin, they will try to understand the design by working out what message is intended, while a functionalist will try to understand what sorts of authority the design reflects. Let us take a concrete example to illustrate this: the gold dinars of the Umayyad Caliphate. This is a period in which coin design changed dramatically and in which historians have been very interested in what the designs might tell us. This coin is an example of the standing caliph type. The image, which also occurs on some copper and silver coins, was the first time a Muslim ruler had been depicted numismatically. A propagandist would reason that the Caliph, Abd al-Malik, wants to convince users of his greatness and religious authority, important messages in the wake of a destabilising civil war. Functionalists, on the other hand, assume that most users already knew how powerful the Caliph was and understood his religious authority, and that those elements of common knowledge are being used to guarantee the coin. The difference between the propagandists and functionalists becomes even more pronounced when you put this into a longer sequence. Initially, the Umayyads had issued copies of the already circulating Byzantine coinage, Over time, they removed the more overt Christian symbols and added Arabic inscriptions, but these coins still featured the image of the Byzantine emperor and the contemporary silver the image of the Sasanian emperor. The standing caliph type itself lasted just 4 years before it was replaced by a novel type, the purely epigraphic coinage featuring Quranic verses, which would set the pattern for Islamic coinage for the next 1,000 years. In 1957, Andrei Grabar, in a book on Byzantine iconoclasm, tried to explain the changing coin designs as part of a war of images. The Byzantines and Umayyads were each adding religious imagery to proclaim the superiority of their creed to the general users in Syria and Iraq, to bolster their claims to political power and to offend the sensibilities of their opponents. Though subsequent scholars have differed with Grabar in details, they've accepted his suggestion of numismatic propaganda. How else can the variety of design be explained? It is true that rapid change of design was the basis of early arguments for propaganda, and functionalists have often argued the superiority of their theory on the basis of continuity, but it is a misunderstanding of these two theories to assume one explains change and the other conservatism. Functionalism, in fact, supposes different claims to authority pulling against each other and therefore competing for control over the design. On one hand, it helps for new coins to look like existing coins, so that they are familiar. In the extreme, this can lead to immobilized types, where coins retain the same design, even referring to long-dead kings, for decades or centuries, a phenomena apparent in the imitation of Byzantine coins by the early Arab rulers. On the other hand, political authorities, and sometimes religious belief, can change very rapidly. This pulls in the opposite direction. It is desirable to change the design of coins to keep their political, religious, and administrative references current. In the Umayyad period, the population had long been used to Byzantine, or actually in most regions Sasanian coins, but there was a disconnect between the symbolic claims to authority made by those coins and the reality of Abd al-Malik's power. From the functional point of view, the interesting aspect of the reform is not the use of the standing caliph type, but the failure of that modest change. And by modest change, I mean that Abd al-Malik is substituted for the Byzantine emperor and Islam for Christianity, but the symbolic structure of the coin is unaltered. The ruler is portrayed as powerful to authorise the coin, and the god is placed in the subordinate position, the reverse of the coin, as support for the ruler, pattern which had dominated coinage for about 1,000 years at this point. The subsequent reform is much more radical, not because it removes images or because of the particular verses it chooses, but because it removes the secular authority entirely. The earliest reformed coins reference only Allah and Muhammad, and from this point Islamic sources treat the side which most directly references Allah as the obverse. Coins reflect a claim that authority stems from God, not political figures, and that it is mediated through the Quran. Hopefully this example makes clear how these theoretical positions lead to very different understandings of the same evidence. A propagandist might see the coins driving a heightened conflict between Byzantium and the new Umayyad state. A functionalist would see the coins reflecting a fundamental shift in the rhetoric of authority, one that it was at odds with traditional ideas, and given that Byzantine coins at this period also flirt with similar imagery, probably one that had wider currency than just Arab theologians. Propaganda and function are not theories you can pick and mix with. They disagree fundamentally about what motivates coin design. You can, of course, apply them to different types of money. There is no question propaganda plays a role in the design of modern banknotes, even if most functionalists reject its role in pre-modern money. And from its beginnings, some advocates of propaganda have argued it is an exceptional model, applicable particularly to the varied designs of Roman coinage. I am not here to tell you who is right. Generally speaking, pre-modern sources tend to back the functionalists when they do talk about coin design, which is not very often, and by and large, the functionalists have had the better of the intellectual argument throughout the 20th century. But within the field of numismatics, the propaganda position is more popular, perhaps because it is much easier to draw historical conclusions using it, it feels more powerful as a theory, and it is closer to our modern understanding of money. The point today was to explain what these two different theories assume, and to illustrate why it matters. History is always shaped by competing theories like these. Some people might suggest even more than it is by the evidence itself, and propaganda and function are undoubtedly the two most important theories that shape the interpretation of coins, even if numismatists do not always acknowledge them.